what we see with virtually all of our large enterprise customers, they're all very concerned about the output of the models. So they effectively, almost all of them, like lean towards the knowledge-based capability versus the purely generative one, just because they need to approve all the different copy with legal. And that's a particular, just like, even if you go beyond anything else, like for instance, is it safe to just like set up OpenAI and like send data to them? Are they going to protect it properly? Or do you need an LLM that's on-prem? It won't even get to that. The sheer fact that the output of these models is completely unpredictable gets all of these different large organizations to pause.
Andrei.
Brett, very nice to see you.
Excellent to see you as well. All right, so I know you've got a lot to show, and we're going to have a fun conversation in just a moment, but I'll let you take it away.
Well, my name is Andrei Papancea. I'm the CEO and Chief Product Officer of NLX. We're a conversational AI company. Our core product is an end-to-end SaaS no-code platform for the enterprise builder to build, manage, deploy, analyze conversational AI applications at scale. We handle everything from integrations to the no-code design to, as I mentioned, like just analytics. It goes pretty deep. And the output of our platform are three different kinds of automated conversations. Chat, voice, most of you are familiar with those, and we have a special patented class in the multimodal space that allows us to synchronize multiple channels and drive richer, better experiences. Now, since the topic today revolves around generative AI, just want to cover a little bit the principles of how at NLX we approach generative AI and large language models in general. Being an enterprise platform, it's quite critical to us that like we're mindful of what's practical and what's not when it comes to companies and protecting brands and whatnot. So a few of these principles focus on, first of all, scalability and choice over walled gardens. What that means is we partner directly with various large language model and NLP providers to build best-in-class ecosystems for these enterprises to choose from. We've been NLP agnostic from the get-go, and as large language models have been maturing over the past couple of months, we've made available not just like an OpenAI, but also other alternatives like Cohere, all the way to on-prem, or specifically more on-cloud prem LLMs that can be deployed in the customer's like cloud environment. Furthermore, we focus on practical AI over any form of hype. So for that reason, we've started off like by focusing on things like dynamic Q&A, various different conversation use. Summarization is a great example. I just like Brett and several other colleagues today called out. Also, we focus on, sort of building from the ground truth over the opinion. So in that sense, what we refer to as making sense of the customer's data before they go jump heads first in like building use cases. Because at scale, very interesting things happen. I used to work for American Express, and once we thought like the challenge was to sort of like deploy these applications to production. It was actually, as I'm sure a lot of you know by now, like just what comes after deployment to production, right? So we have all kinds of tool sets and things like some deployed, some in the works that are meant to provide that sort of cover for the enterprise. And then last but certainly not least, guardrails and safety. Working with lots of large enterprise customers, protecting their brand, and sort of avoiding, just making sure they don't end up in any sort of legal debacle. It's very important for them that when using these types of capabilities, they protect the brand as well, right? So like we're working through various degrees of functionality that allow you to leverage these types of innovations as we've seen for the past couple of months, but in a way that's safe for the enterprise. maybe a slightly different view on how we are applying these principles in practice, but basically we're seeing in the market, and we're doing a lot of progress on sort of blending in the structured building of intents and content, and I'll get to that in a second as to when it's practical to do that and when it's not, and also be able to accelerate that build out using generative AI, right? Like, can you just say, hey, I want to build a pizza bot, or I want to build a car replacement assistant, and sort of like scaffold a lot of that structured logic. So it might not get you 100% of the way, as we know these models are not perfect, but it might get you 75, 80% of the way there. Furthermore, like as I mentioned a little bit earlier, like using LLMs to identify volume drivers, right? So how do you help enterprises like stay on top of what they don't know yet? So I'll give a concrete example of something I've experienced while at American Express. For those of you who are customers of American Express, you might know they, for certain card products, they have a premium concierge feature. And at the time, we didn't really have specific tool sets to look over, to monitor the I guess, volume of conversation the way I guess it's possible today. And we discovered a few months after the fact that at some point, like a number of people, a couple thousand people, were asking for last-minute Taylor Swift concert tickets. And while that was a good insight to find out, all those couple thousand people ended up speaking with a live agent because we didn't spot that opportunity in time to drive the automation. Because, by the way, the content, or I guess the response to that was like, hey, just go to americanexpress.com/events as an example, and you can sort of self-service. But I'm going to skip the talking and sort of jump into a demo just briefly. What I'm going to cover today is how we use large language models to drive responses from knowledge bases. So how do you avoid having to create 50 to 100 intents for like different like questions that the customers might ask using the power of large language models? And then we'll also focus on some generative examples that also give you choice in how the different like prompt designs might work within our platform. That being said, I'm just going to switch tabs real quick. What you're looking at is what we call Dialog Studio. It's one of our core products within our Conversations by NLX platform. And as I mentioned, Dialog Studio is a one-stop shop for building, managing, deploying, and analyzing conversational AI applications at scale. We're currently on the bots page. I created a bot for today's session. We have a few structured intents associated with this particular bot. And within some of these intents, there's capabilities that point to some generative just functionality. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to make sure everyone can see. As you can see, I have the test chat opened up. I'm just going to refresh the session real quick. And we're greeted with just a simple hello, and then asking, how can I assist you today? I'm just going to say, I'm going to ask, what is voicebot.ai? And within a few moments, we should get back a response. It says it's a company that specializes in voice technology news, research, and analysis. Yes, you can help me with something else. Let's say, who is the founder? And I'm just going to keep it generic. And momentarily, we're going to get back an answer. That's contextual. So I guess notice how, my question of who is the founder doesn't really say who is the founder of voicebot.ai. So it's kind of picking up on the context for the rest of the conversation. So just sort of jumping in real quick to show you how this is structured. We'll go to one of these intents, the knowledge-based intent. This takes us to our canvas. This is our rich no-code editor for building and managing these types of conversations. And if I click into this particular portion of the conversation, you can see how this is structured. The entry point is into this generative text node. And there's a couple different areas, or I guess a couple different inputs to this generative text node. There's a name that you provide for it. In this case, I just called it generative response. So you can use that variable for throughout the rest of the conversation. And then, very importantly, you get to select an integration that drives this response. An OpenAI integration is selected. You can have as many integrations as you like of any particular kind. So you could have like a dev OpenAI and a production OpenAI. As I mentioned earlier, we support multiple large language models. So you could also like pick Cohere AI. And then you have a prompt capability. And last but not least, the feature that enabled us to, answer who is the founder without specifically saying who is the founder of VoiceBot.ai is the ability to include the transcript as context to the large language model, so it can follow up with, the full context of the conversation up to that point. Not going to go necessarily through the rest of these other sort of like visual notes, because I want to take you to the next part of this demo. I'm going to go into this newsletter intent, click into it. It's pretty straightforward. It's an intent that's meant to just allow you to subscribe to a newsletter. So it's going to prompt you for an email address. If the email address matches, then it goes ahead and subscribes you. And then assuming you get subscribed, then it executes an action that stores it in our database. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier that there are situations where you want to use structured intents or structured content. And what I mean by that, if you think about an enterprise, right, they're driven by a lot of business processes. So if we pick let's say a financial services company, they might deal with disputes or with people who are trying to replace their cards. All of those things are very business processes that have very structured logic behind them. And any type of AI, any type of artificial intelligence, in particular, any type of machine learning driven system is statistical in nature. And if you break it down to that, it's virtually guaranteed to not be 100% accurate all the time. And if you think about the importance of business processes through the lens of an enterprise, you don't want an AI to just like randomly skip steps into a business process, right? So for that reason, the structured world of intents, while still natural language driven, right? Because in order to get to this intent, you'll have to use natural language and to capture any of the slots or entities. Again, natural language processing or traditional natural language processing kicks in. But then you can blend that with the generative capabilities or the knowledge-based capabilities to answer the more ad hoc questions, right? Because you can't foresee all the different things that people might say. And you can then use the best of both worlds, drive your business processes through more structured logic, and then combine that with the flexibility that generative AI produces. So if I hit test here, you can test directly onto the canvas. It asks me, thank you for your interest in our newsletter. What's your email address? And instead, I'm just going to ask, what is user, or maybe what are user choice nodes? I'm going to get back an answer, let's see, momentarily, that says user choice nodes are elements in decision tree or flowchart, blah, blah, blah. Some generic response that's coming from, in this case, the GPT model that's hooked up under the hood. Now, also notice it prompts me with, would you like to continue subscribing to our newsletter? So I can say yes. And then it continues with, what's your email address? And then now I can sort of like continue putting in my email, and it subscribes me. Now, what's powerful here is, again, the blend of the structured logic with the generative logic, where you can effectively drive the structured process. If someone has a question in the middle of the process, you can go ahead, answer it, and then come back, resume the structured process, and continue to execute it all the way to completion. Now, this is, again, a generic answer, not really contextual to NLX. And what I've done a little bit earlier today is we ingested our own documentation as a knowledge base within our platform. And what I'm going to do next to just kind of follow the exact same pattern here, but instead of getting this generic answer from GPT-3, we're going to get, ideally, an answer from within our knowledge base, the NLX knowledge base. So what I'm going to do is go back to our knowledge base intent. And you might have noticed that there's a bunch of other logic here, and then instead it pointed to this node called redirection. that was executing the generative text response. If I go back, I'm going to point us to our data, the data request here that pulls the knowledge-based article. And if we go back to our newsletter intent, just to kind of execute the exact same flow, what our user choice was. So now it says, user chain nodes allows users to select from a list of options. You can click here to learn more. Notice how now the answer that we're getting back is from the knowledge base. It's more contextual, it's more clean. It can point back to, it's open-ended too. Like, again, I asked a free-form question, and it very well just allows us to continue the business process as well.
Really like that. It was a really interesting demo, particularly what you showed, like the flexibility and the real-time nature of it. I also was very impressed at the speed of generation of the responses, which was interesting for the LLM. Have you done anything specifically to reduce the latency in the response generation?
We do, and honestly, that's kind of where, in addition to our approach to being an open platform, that was one of the drivers, especially for our enterprise customers, to offer alternatives, whether it's something like Cohere AI, that's like, let's say, an OpenAI alternative specifically focused on providing an enterprise level service, but also then the models that can be deployed on cloud prem. Because then, let's say, if you deploy something onto Amazon SageMaker or something like that, you can control the inference instance size and all those different things a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. All right, so there's another question here, and this is interesting since you allow both of the routing to the LLM versus the internal knowledge base. You know, how do you discriminate in the routing of the question to OpenAI API or to your own knowledge bases? So I guess we have some sort of prioritization orchestration step here.
It's a good question. Well, the power of it is in the flexibility of how we've set up our I guess, both our NLU and our conversation builder. It allows you to sort of sequence them the way that it makes sense. Normally, you'd want to prioritize things over KB. And frankly, in practice, more often than not, you probably wouldn't use the pure generative feature unless you have an LLM that you control and you know exactly what it's been trained on. So you minimize hallucinations and things like that. So ultimately, you can organize those blocks and sequence them in any way you like.
Okay. You started out, or very early in your presentation, you started talking about this idea of these principles. And I'm interested in that because everyone's rushing to solution. And they're not sort of stepping back and saying, hey, what's important here? And before I deploy the solution, what's the framework that I believe that I need to operate within?
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I think part of the problem with the rush is, obviously, I'm just going to make the statement, whatever's come out of OpenAI is mesmerizing, right? Like, I'm a daily user of their capabilities. And I think just like, you know, with Google, it doesn't matter if it gets your query wrong or you don't get exactly the right thing 1 out of 10 times, right? It's not a driverless car. It won't harm anyone, at least perceivably so. Depends on how you use them. But going a little bit beyond that, it's really about sorry, I forgot the question. Can you please?
Yeah, we're talking about this idea of starting with principles versus rushing.
Right. The principles, very well. Yeah, sorry. So in essence, it takes only a couple minutes to break most of like the pure generative like responses, right?
Yes.
So showing that to any type of enterprise customer then gets them to pause. So then all of a sudden they look to us for guidance and just trying to figure out like what's possible, because they don't want to incorporate the flexibility and the versatility that these types of models bring to life, right? Like you see through like the GPTs of the world and whatnot. But so the moment you kind of like show the dangers of it, and I've even encountered, I think you and I talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but when I was at American Express, I encountered a situation where we received a suicide note come through the chat. And the note was like 1 to 2 sentences. It wasn't very long, and just whatever I remembered actually prompted ChatGPT with that, and it kind of drafted the goodbye letter to my friends and family, which was very eerie, right? So ultimately, the principles that we sort of like part of the principles are rooted in our identity as a company, and the other one is out of the demand that we've seen from the enterprises with to sort of have some guidelines on how to approach these types of technologies so they can stay innovative, but at the same time to be mindful and protective of their brand.
Well, I like that story. I mean, I like that story is heartbreaking to hear, but I do like the illustration that you're talking about here. And I wonder if your focus on principles and practicality is rooted in the fact that you were on the other side of the table.
Mm-hmm.
Just not too long ago, when you were at Amex, you were the buyer of solutions, you were the implementer of solutions, but more importantly, you were the maintainer of these solutions, and like ultimately needed to improve them over time. And most of the discussion in this space is not by people on the buy side, the user side. Most of the discussion is about the people that are providing the solutions. And I wonder how that shapes your perspective about what to do, how to implement, how to harness the benefits of generative.
Great question. Honestly, it shaped it quite a bit. I had the fortune to actually build the conversational AI for American Express from the ground up, from zero all the way to production, to seeing all these different things at scale. And as a software engineer, I was effectively the funnel for everything from content updates to any type of business logic to any type of R&D or new features or things that we need to do. So for one, the premise of our entire platform and our architecture is to be able to address the types of complexities at scale that an American Express might encounter. Now, because of that architecture that's deeply rooted in just the operational efficiency of a company like American Express, it's allowed us to integrate large language models in any type of like generative AI pretty much as a first-class citizen and without a lot of hassle, because we're big proponents of just architecture first. And in that regard, it just has a natural place. And when you think about things like small talk and the types of FAQs that people might ask in so many different quirky ways. Occasionally we bump into customers and we go on these sessions to review whatever, like the transcripts, and figure out like how we might want to improve different assistants and stuff. Like just kind of using an airline example, some people will just say reservation. It's like, as a human being, you can't really know what the heck that person means by reservation. Like, do you want to cancel it? Do you want to book it? Do you want to like change it? Do you want to upgrade your reservation? Whatever it is. So really, it's kind of cool to see how these types of components just fit naturally side by side with that structured component that I was talking about a little bit earlier. So for that reason, it just fits in like a glove, I'd say.
Well, I like this idea of like practical solutions, principles. I want to also ask you, since you've been in the big corporate environment, about governance and what your thoughts are about how generative AI will potentially impact governance, or if the customers you're talking to are even thinking about this yet. Are they force fitting it into existing governance? Are they creating new governance? What is it?
They're absolutely thinking about governance. I mean, for one, what we see with virtually all of our large enterprise customers, they're all very concerned about the output of the models. So they effectively, almost all of them, like lean towards the knowledge-based capability versus the purely generative one, just because they need to approve all the different copy with legal. And that's a particular just like, even if you go beyond anything else, like for instance, is it safe to just like set up OpenAI and like send data to them? Are they going to protect it properly, or do you need an LLM that's on-prem? It won't even get to that. The sheer fact that the output of these models is completely unpredictable gets all of these different large organizations to pause. And that's okay, because as we've seen, they're used, and I really like the human first example. It's like really cool use of that. And frankly, like that summarization that you can do. And even when you like escalate to an agent, right? Like being able to summarize the transcript and pass it over. That generative capability can be used in different ways. It doesn't necessarily just have to be used in the form that, for instance, ChatGPT uses it. I think for the purposes of entertainment, that works great. But outside of that, I think for now, enterprises will just choose the safe path, right? You don't want to. I think with one of our customers, we actually it's a very well known global brand. We asked ChatGPT a question as an example, like through our platform, like, what is, just like blank, right? Just like I said, what is voice bot? And the answer that came back would have raised like significant red flags with their legal for various different reasons, right? So like that was enough of an example for them to be like, no, we want to do something else. This is not the right thing. So
is that going to keep people from deploying these generative AI solutions, or are they just going to go slow?
No, I think that's going to push people like the presenters today and everyone else in the community to come up with creative ways of incorporating these technologies to drive that type of innovation. Enterprises won't stop demanding the type of innovation that ChatGPT sort of put forward. They'll just demand the guardrails and the control. So ultimately, it's a win-win. It's actually quite exciting. For just odd reasons, I like being in the uncomfortable position most of the times because I feel that's where the best ideas come out of. So
that's fair. Okay, so when you were sitting at Amex and you were building conversational assistant for Amex, what one feature that's available today from LLMs do you wish you had then?
It's a very good question. Honestly, I'm just going to say the summarization for the customer care professionals, as they're called, the agents. And the reason for it being is Amex is a very customer-centric brand. So like they go to extreme lengths to make sure they do the right thing and provide the best possible service to their customers. The fact that, like, let's say if you had like a longer, even think about it, even if you're not dealing with the bot to bot interact, like user to bot interaction, but instead, let's say you got escalated to an agent, you have like a 10-minute conversation, you get annoyed because things like that happen, and then you get transferred to the next agent. Summarizing everything up to that point can be incredibly, like, can speed track the rest of the conversation quite a bit. So frankly, I'll pick that.
I think that's a great one. I mean, and we think about this in two ways. One is that sometimes they just ask you to repeat everything, so you're starting over. Other times they'll take a minute, it's part of their process, to sort of look at the conversation, but you never quite know if they're going to pull out the important points. And I actually feel that because they're so busy and there's a lot of context switching and these customer support with the live agent type of scenarios, that these summarizations might generate a lot more consistency. And I think people overlook that it'll pull out what it thinks are the most important points. Maybe it'll miss something, but humans miss those too. It'll be easy for them to refer back to it as opposed to just having read something and trying to keep it in memory. And then also, we talk about the inconsistency of LLMs potentially because they're prediction models. A lot of times they're more consistent than agents are. And we think about one agent handles something one way, another agent handles something another way, or slightly differently, or they use a different tone, or whatever it might be. I think that people might be overlooking this idea that, we might actually get more normalization. We might get more consistency with LLMs because it's helping the agents sort of stay on track, stay in brand, stay in the area that they need to focus on.
Absolutely. I think that's a super valid point. Ultimately, being able, everywhere where you can be slightly imperfect, generative AI works like a charm.
We're going to leave it right there. That's amazing. Yep. How can people connect with you, find out more about NLX?
NLX.ai, or I'm on LinkedIn. Looking forward to hearing from any or all of you, regardless of what the questions are. So thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for taking the time.
Awesome. Andrei Papancea, thanks so much for joining me today.